The next time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pandansky, who also brought sack lunches. Stanley sat with his back against a pile of dirt and ate. He had a bologna sandwich, potato chips, and a large chocolate chip cookie. How you doing? Asked Magnet. Not real good, said Stanley. Well, the first hole's the hardest, Magnet said. Stanley took a long, deep breath. He couldn't afford to dwindle. He was way behind the others, and the sun just kept getting hotter. It wasn't even noon yet, but he didn't know if he had the strength to stand up. He thought about quitting. He wondered what they would do to him. What could they do to him? His clothes were soaked in sweat. In school, he learned that sweating was good for you. It's nature's way of keeping you cool. So why was he so hot? Using his shovel for support, he managed to get to his feet. Where are we supposed to go to the bathroom? He asked Magnet. Magnet gestured with his arms to the great expanse around them. Pick a hole, any hole, he said. Stanley staggered against the lake, almost falling over a dirt pile. Behind him, he heard Magnet said, but first make sure nothing's living in the hole. Back in time. Ancestors. After leaving Myra's house, Elia wandered aimlessly through the town until he found himself down by the wharf. He sat on the edge of the pier and stared down into the cold, black water. He could not understand how Myra had trouble deciding between him and Igor. He thought she loved him. Even if she didn't love him, couldn't she see what a foul person Igor was? It was like Madame Zeroni had said. Her head was as empty as a flower pot. Some men were gathered on another dock, and he went to see what was going on. A sign read, "Duck hands wanted, free passage to America." He had no sailing experience, but the ship's captain signed him aboard. The captain could see Elia was a man of great strength. Not everybody could carry a full-grown pig up the side of a mountain. It wasn't until the ship had cleared the harbor and was heading across the Atlantic that he suddenly remembered his promise to carry Madame Zeroni up the mountain. He felt terrible. He wasn't afraid of the curse. He thought that was a lot of nonsense. He felt bad because he knew Madame Zeroni had wanted to drink from the stream before she died. Back to the present time. Zero was the smallest kid in Group D, but he was the first one to finish digging. You're finished? Stanley said. Zero said nothing. Stanley walked to Zero's hole and watched him measure it with his shovel. The top of his hole was perfectly circle, and the sides were smooth and steep. Not one dirt clod made or more than necessary had been removed from the earth. Zero pulled himself up to the surface. He didn't even smile. He looked down at his perfectly dug hole, spat in it, and turned and headed back to the camp compound. Zero's one weird dude, Zigzag said. Stanley would have laughed, but he didn't have the strength. Zigzag had to be the weirdest dude Stanley had ever seen. He had a long, skinny neck and a big round head with wild, frizzy blonde hair that stuck in all directions. His head seemed to bob up and down on his neck, like it was on a spring. Armpit was the second one to finish digging. He also spat into his hole before heading back to the camp compound. One by one, Stanley watched each of the boys spit into their hole and return to the camp compound. Stanley kept digging. His hole was almost up to his shoulders. Although it was hard to tell exactly where the ground level was because his dirt pile completely surrounded the hole. The deeper he got, the harder it was to raise the dirt out of the hole. Once again, he realized he was going to have to move the piles. His cap was stained with blood from his hands. He felt like he was digging his own grave. Back to the past. In America, Elia learned to speak English. He fell in love with a woman named Sarah Miller. She could push a plow, milk a goat, and, most important, think for herself. She and Elia often stayed up half the night talking and laughing together. Their life was not easy. Elio worked hard, but bad luck seemed to follow him everywhere. He always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He remembered Madame Zeroni telling him that she had a son in America. Elio was forever looking for him. He'd walk up to complete strangers and ask if they knew someone named Zeroni or had ever heard of anyone named Zeroni. No one did. Elio wasn't sure what he'd do if he ever found Madame Zeroni's son anyway. Carry him up a mountain and sing a pig lullaby to him? After his barn was struck by lightning for a third time, he told Sarah about the broken promise to Madame Zeroni. I'm worse than a pig thief, he said. You should leave me and find someone who isn't cursed. I'm not leaving you, said Sarah, but I want you to do one thing for me. Anything. Sing me the pig lullaby, Sarah said. He sang it for her. Her eyes sparkled. That's so pretty. What does it mean? Elio tried his best to translate it from Latvian to English, but it wasn't the same. Oh, it rhymes in Latvian, he told her. I could tell, said Sarah. A year later, their child was born. Sarah named him Stanley because she noticed Stanley and Yelnats spelled backwards was the same. Sarah changed the words of the pig lullaby so they rhymed, and every night she sang them to little Stanley. If only the woodpecker sighs, the bark on the tree was as soft as the skies, while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, crying it to the moon, if only, if only. Back to the present. Stanley's hole was as deep as his shovel, but not quite wide enough at the bottom. He grimaced as he sliced off a chunk of dirt, then raised it and flung it into the pile. He laid his shovel back down on the bottom of the hole, and to his surprise, it fit. He rotated it and only had to chip off a few chunks of dirt here and there before it would lie flat across the hole in every direction. He heard the water truck approaching and felt a strange sense of pride at being able to show Mr. Sir or Mr. Pendanski that he dug his first hole. He put his hand on the rim and tried to pull himself up. He couldn't do it. His arms were too weak to lift his heavy body. He used his legs to help, but he just didn't have any more strength. He was trapped in his hole. It was almost funny, but he wasn't in the mood to laugh. Stanley, he heard Pendanski yell. Using his shovel, he dug 2 footholes in the whole wall. He climbed out to see Mr. Pendanski walking toward him. Oh gosh, I was afraid you fainted, Mr. Pendanski said. You wouldn't have been the first. I'm finished, Stanley said, putting his blood-spotted cap back on his head. Oh, all right, said Mr. Pendanski, raising his hand for a high five, but Stanley ignored it. He didn't have the strength. Mr. Pendanski lowered his hand and looked at Stanley's hole. Oh, well done. You want to ride back? Stanley shook his head. No, I'll walk. Mr. Pendanski climbed back in the truck without filling Stanley's canteen. Stanley waited for him to drive away, then took another look at his hole. He knew it was nothing to be proud of, but he felt proud nonetheless. He sucked up his last bit of saliva, and he spit. Chapter 8. A lot of people don't believe in curses. A lot of people don't believe in yellow-spotted lizards either. But if one bites you, it doesn't make a difference whether you believe in it or not. Actually, it's kind of odd that scientists named the lizard after its yellow spots. Each lizard has exactly 11 yellow spots, but the spots are hard to see on its yellow-green body. The lizard is from 6 to 10 inches long and has big red eyes. In truth, its eyes are yellow, and it is the skin around the eyes which is red. But everyone always speaks of its red eyes. It also has black teeth and milky white tongue. Looking at it once, you would have thought that it should have been named red-eyed lizard or black-toothed lizard, or perhaps white-tongued lizard. If you've ever been close enough to see the yellow spots, you're probably dead. The yellow-spotted lizard like to live in holes, which offer shade from the sun and protection from predatory birds. Up to 20 lizards may live in one hole. They have strong, powerful legs and can leap out of very deep, dark holes to attack their prey. They eat small animals, insects, certain cactus thorns, and the shells of sunflower seeds. Okay, I'll stop there.